This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
Hey, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Agile discussion group. And it's really great that we have the opportunity to have Michael James here. And let me just show this page. So this is our Agile discussion group for the month of April. And Michael James is our presenter. And what's really great is Michael has already taught, he's been working with our chapter, and he has already taught 2 CSM-CLB classes that we've gotten really great feedback from. And there's actually another one coming up at the end of June. And so, you know, I've taken the CSM class, a few times, and I find that because of the way it's structured, whenever you take it, you get a different perspective because Scrum Alliance has each CST, certified Scrum trainer, create their own class. So it's very insightful. Just a thought there. And so pretty much, Michael, if you've ever come to the in-person meetings, there's basically like Why Doesn't Scrum Work guide that he actually created. It's like a comic book that's really fun. It's like this blue comic book. And so Michael's definitely been in the industry for a long time, and I'm not going to read all this to you. And so instead of spending any more time with the intro, I'm just going to turn it over to Michael now. And so here we go, Michael James from Seattle Scrum Works. Thank you.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering, I want to see your faces again. There we go, to the extent that I can. Because I've got, as you guys were talking in the beginning, I started to wonder if my original idea of what to talk about might be too advanced or might be too remedial. It's hard for me to know that. Maybe you could give me, and so I do depend on interactions with all y'all, especially because we have a smaller group. If you could give me some idea of in general, how many people here have active working in large-scale Scrum environments, or single-team Scrum environments, or no Scrum experience at all, training prior, or if you're complete dyed-in-the-wool traditional project manager coming at us from outside. That's all okay. Let me know where you are, because that will help me adjust what I do with you this evening.
More than one.
All of the above?
Yeah, exactly.
Would it be safe to assume, like, if you know what a sprint is, or
Yep.
if I talk about a sprint, you're gonna know what that's. I think that's reached the common vernacular. And then there are a lot of other Scrum words which we use that are typically distorted from their original meaning. So even though this is the most dangerous thing of all, is when we it's not what we don't know, it's what we know that ain't so. So some things, vast misconceptions, especially as the Scrum certification has taken off and created some bizarre incentives. All right, so I'm looking at, I don't usually see this, I'll look at the chat this time, but you don't have to use the chat. You don't have to do that. Oh, okay, good. I see a voting system. Option 1, just starting. John would be the outlier here, it looks like.
There's always one that's got to show off.
Option 1 was large scale, not just starting.
Yeah, that's what I took too. I thought it was large scale was 1.
Oh, I see. Okay, large scale option 1. Okay. All right. Let me first. So our topic, or I thought would be a useful topic, just because I see organizations struggle with this so much, is when you have a multi-team situation, how to get those teams to, well, what should we do to coordinate those teams? There is, I will say, less than zero about that in the first Scrum book. If anyone's familiar with it, the 1999, it's like actually 1990 book that came out, based on. It's 2001, but the experience that they're drawing from, the papers that it was based on, were written in the 1990s. And so you may not know this. So there's, right at the end of this book, they put some advice, because it's like, well, wait a minute, we just told everyone how to make this work with 7 people, but everyone who's talking to us is coming from like 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 person organizations. And so it's kind of as an afterthought, they said, well, how about this Scrum of Scrums thing? Let's just do that. Scrum works for 7 people, so what if we just fractally scale it up that way? It looks good. So they put that at the end of the book, and without a whole lot of actual experience doing it when this came out. And then about 5 years later, Ken Schwaber wrote another book and spent some time talking about the problems that were caused by trying to do this Scrum of Scrums thing. Now, here's the problem. It's you know how like a song, you remember this song from like when I grew up, there was like what kinds of kids eat Oscar Mayer wieners? Or was it kids who climb on rocks? And that, like, I heard that again a couple weeks ago, and it just brought back the 1970s to me. Does anyone, it's like things that stick in your head. And a Scrum of Scrums is sort of like that. It's like poetic. It kind of sticks in your head. Whether or not it's a good idea is a whole separate topic. And we're all irrational that way. So we don't have great guidance from the early days of Scrum, and we did through experience, through making, usually by doing it wrong, we learned through hard experience some other ideas of how to make it work. But let me hear from some of you. I'm going to make some assumptions, and you can tell me if my assumptions are wrong. But I'll talk about the way that we used to handle this problem anyway. Like one of my in the early 1990s, one of the things I did was work on airplanes, and the Boeing 777, needed software. They approached that kind of the same way they approach any sort of large project, any large undertaking, which was by, essentially waterfall. We start with our requirements, and then we do some initial architecture, initial overall design based on our understanding of the requirements at that time, and we chop it up. Say we're going to need this, and we chop it up into components. Okay, we're going to need this, it's going to have to do this, and that's going to connect to this, and we're going to have to do that. And then we have people, so after we come up with these initial components, we're going to need a way for these components to talk to each other. So very early in our development, we're going to have this architecture and also some interfaces defined between the different components. So we're going to lay down some APIs, perhaps some contracts, and if we're working in a formal environment, we might even have interface requirements documents and all kinds of things that, all kinds of different ways that these have been codified. Is that similar to what you've seen on your large undertakings, where we make an initial design, initial perhaps APIs, and then we're going to figure out, okay, who's going to work on which pieces? We'll set up departments or teams, or or have you discovered some magical way to do it that doesn't require any of those steps?
We're looking for that silver bullet, Michael. So
it's pretty much, and I'm describing what we did. Well, in the 80s and in the early 1990s, and most of the places that I'm visiting are still doing something like that. Now, they have different names for it, but it's still, if you step back far enough, you still see a waterfall there when you look back at it. And it's not always obvious that we say, no, we don't do waterfall here. You look at all our Scrum Masters and product owners and stuff like that. And so we have typically some kind of hybrid. And we'll get into that, where the hybrid happens. How we did it before, so we started with some kind of requirements. And unfortunately, my timer's not working. It's on the fritz, so I'm going to have to try to gauge this. I'll try not to. I usually try to cram too much content in, so I'm trying to pace ourselves here. The ways that I'm going to talk about doing this, so I'm going to give you, there's some limitations to this talk, and I'm going to go a little bit into technical practices. So even if you're not a developer, at least if you're, I'm hoping that you're at least curious about those things, or else I'm going to lose you with some of the stuff I talk about. And the things that I'm going to talk about also require organizational change, because I don't know any way to do this that I've seen work anyway, for in the long run. that didn't involve some change to structure and policy of the organization, including perhaps the concept of what is a project in the first place. And I'm assuming you can all define project. And we'll see how some parts of that, at least the traditional old idea of a project might be harmful, might be counterproductive to what we're trying to do in the 21st century. So what did I forget? We're going to, as we break the system into subsystems and components and the interfaces between them, similar to the same kind of approach that we would have used for the actual, in the case of like the Boeing 777, for designing the airplane, where there was an initial design for that, and then figuring out how the pieces are going to fit together. And at some point there was delegation. For example, the tail made out of composite, carbon fiber composites materials. Part of that, or the rudder anyway, was done in Australia and different things. And the idea is that we just put all these pieces together, and if we did our work right in the beginning, it'll just work. And that's the same idea, the same engineers, the same systems engineers and principal engineers and software architects, different names for this. Program managers with technical engineering managers, came up with that overall design, and hopefully they got it right in the first place. And then if we're doing, so in a company nowadays, this is the point after we've done all that. Now we've hired people, we've set up perhaps departments or teams, and we're figuring out who's going to do what. And here's possibly where some of you come into the picture, where you're figuring out, well, so they gave me these estimates, and I'm figuring out it's going to take this long to do this. If we have this number of people and this amount of resource here, and we have to line it up so it all converges at some point where we can integrate together. Now, who does that for you? Or can you tell me some of the names of the job titles involved with doing the work I've described so far? Feel free to just yell out. I get lonely if you don't talk to me.
Architect.
Architect. Architect would be one title associated with that. In aerospace, we often have this title of principal engineer. We'll be doing that. Engineering manager. Any other, or project managers also, right? Would be at some level, or program managers. Any other?
Maybe a release manager?
Release manager, yeah, we'd see someone like that.
Subject matter experts.
So yeah, SME, one way or another, you have some, exactly, yeah, people with prior experience doing these kinds of things. And so at this point, after we've done all that, for many places I've seen, now we start doing Scrum. So now we've got a bunch of teams set up, and we have perhaps some of you are going to be acting as Scrum Masters or product owners for all these teams that are organized around the structural parts of the product, based on the structure, or at least our initial guess of what the structure should be from that upfront, from that initial phase. And so now we start doing Scrum. And typically here's where we find out, well, that class I took where we wrote user stories, I'm having trouble writing user stories for this component that's part of a large system. Now, sometimes we can sort of shoehorn them in, or now, and we get so many, I constantly see these discussions about, well, should we have technical stories in our backlog? Or should we have, or how are we supposed to do this thing that's user-centric when our teams aren't? At least some of our teams aren't user-centric. And we also have some other contradictions start to reveal themselves at this point. We're prioritizing our work. We're doing this work so that someone else can do something. We're doing this work is hot for us because we're critical path, or particular person or team or a group, but they've become critical path. Now, if you try to draw a heat map, and there's one in my spoof of that here in my comic book. Discover that, whoops, here we go. That if we were to step back and look at this, only a few teams are doing the most valuable work. And perhaps it's not hard for you to visualize a situation where the work that one team is doing is 1,000 times more important in the big picture than the work another team is doing, or maybe it even comes down to a couple of key individuals. And maybe you've noticed this if you've got gray hair, you've noticed that it's like the same people wind up being, or no hair, like losing hair, like a couple of us. Same people are critical, who were critical path at their last job. After 6 months in their new job, they're critical path here. Like, now why does that keep happening? Didn't we learn anything from this before, from the previous times? So some of what can go wrong with this. Did I leave anything out? And then eventually, we're going to integrate those. The plan, anyway, is to integrate those components, perhaps at some future date. Now, I've made some of this obvious, but some of the problems with this, I think, will be obvious. You've heard the usual, well, from your own life experience, or if you've heard the usual spiel about why waterfall might not always be the right way to develop software. But there's also some things that are not obvious that are disadvantages of the approach I described. Anyone want to yell some of them out? Or any of you, am I describing a scenario that's familiar to you? Anyone that's here? Oh.
Just
I'll
the
bet if-
problem that I see is that maybe when the pieces are coming together, not everybody is available to resolve conflicts.
Yeah, that's one. So when we discover that the pieces didn't fit together the way we originally expected them to, and then who's going to fix that? Whose job does that become? Whose budget is that? I have a picture of that. Situation John, no, not that one. Let's try this again. Here we go. Situation John just described. We built all these different components, and now we've got the problem of, they don't work together that well, or they don't fit together, or this could even happen, during live production. Who's supposed to fix these things, the results of these integration problems? And when does that happen? It wasn't in our original schedule, wasn't part of our plan. I'm going to put this into a category of problems. Well, let's talk some other things that fall into this category. Did we have the user's needs right initially? So the usual criticism of waterfall is that we're really just basing this on speculation, or what they say they want, which is also a kind of speculation. It turns out people don't know what they're eventually going to want. Like Zoom is a good example here. Back in the beginning of the pandemic, probably had no idea what features Zoom would have today, or what things that we wanted to fix about it. People are using Microsoft Word. People were working on Microsoft Word decades ago. How come it's not done? How come it's not finished? Right? And this sort of brings to the surface of the idea of project that has an end date. It's supposed to be completely done so that people can be available, resources are available to work on other projects. Except that it seems that in the 21st century, and for software products in general, there isn't an end anymore. There's a continuous stream of value. We want to release, in many cases anyway, we want to be able to release as frequently as we can. or as every time the value of releasing exceeds the cost of releasing, we want to be able to continue to adapt to customer needs. So one of our assumptions that's going to bite us is the belief that we knew what the customer really needed or is eventually going to turn out to need. And that's the second one, is that their needs won't change. So even if we had perfect understanding of our customers' needs at the time, competitors will release new products, or people get new ideas of things that they want from that. So there's a drawback of that.
I have another challenge.
Oh, yeah?
So you talked about the components don't fit together, but even if they will fit together, let's say components B and C depend on component A. It's like, as you're doing it in sprints, you can't wait for A to finish, but if B and C start working, they need to do something to be able to, you know, like it's extra work if you're not developing them in the right order. And so you put it in the something temporary that you might have to take out when it's there. So that causes extra work. So that's a challenge, trying to get it done in the right order.
The surprise rework, right? Let's say team 1 finishes theirs early, team 2 moves on to something else. And now what do we do? Are those people still available to fix the problems when team 2 discovers their piece doesn't fit together the way that they hoped before, that we had all hoped before? Yeah. That's painful. I'm going to put this into the general category of inability to adapt. So an inability to adapt to our mistakes that we made in the beginning, inability to adapt to changing reality and to mistakes that we're inevitably we're going to make along the way, which was what Scrum was supposed to help us with, right? But in some cases, it's not doing that, or at least it's giving us some ability to adapt down at the very, down at the team level, but it doesn't give us the ability to adapt in the big picture. So what would work? Let me see if I missed anything from my notes.
Hey, Michael.
Oh yeah.
What happens if your teams, because of the possible different stakeholders that are driving it, change their priorities? So your components may be going in the right direction, but someone added something to it. That in itself can be a challenge when you try to integrate it.
Yeah, we're trying to hit a moving target, and we don't know which direction it's going to move.
Exactly, yeah. and not knowing who's the one that should be taking the quote lead of all of that. Yeah,
and that the way I've seen organizations. Well, first I'm still in the world of waterfall here, water scrum. The way I've seen a hybrid approach organizations try to tackle that is pretty much the traditional ways, by getting the best expert we can, making the best guesses we can, putting some kind of buffer into it, and allow all the things that I think people in this room have been doing to try to cope with that, with the rigidity of the approach. And so let's back up and let's try it. What might work better? Some things that might work better or have worked better in some cases. I'm going to back all the way up to how we got the requirements. As if we're approaching it from the beginning, requirements are typically being handed off internally. Like if I'm a team, let me show this picture again. Let's use this one here. So I'm one of these teams. I'm working to requirements that have come from inside the organization. And there's a complicated mechanizations between. Now, eventually, they will trace to customer needs. That was our goal, but there is some friction between what the customer's been asking for and when those wind up in our backlog as a team in a typical large scale situation. These are the kinds of problems that I'm usually hearing about, and often we won't discover these situations until we're too far along. Result is And there's another picture. By the way, you can download this comic book in case it describes anything that you're experiencing. There's a particular picture I'd like to put on the screen. I'm not smart enough to find it at the moment. But there's a disconnect. And I have to mention, as a developer, the disconnect between the work I'm doing and the end user is alienating for me. I'm working because I'm worried someone's going to be mad at me for being late, instead of the creative urge to satisfy a human being's needs, a user's needs with the work that I'm doing of this software development. So let's take it back to requirements again. And as I hope you learned if you took a Scrum class, that we really want the people doing the work as directly connected as possible as with the people consuming the work. So we want to involve the actual, rather than an ivory tower expert, we want to involve not saying exclude them, but I'm saying we also want to involve the people who are actually going to be the ones creating the code to solve the problems. So this requires backlog refinement. And I will suggest it really involves a shared backlog rather than a bunch of separate lists for different teams. Objective is to take a whole product view and get people aligned with the value stream to the end user and be able to adapt faster to the end user's needs. You've all heard the story about the one person's, what's your job? I lay bricks. What's your job? I'm building a cathedral. So this is what I mean by, if I say whole product view, the idea that we're seeing the larger vision and being able to connect it with our own empathy with the user's needs. So I'm going to suggest a structural change along with several others, and that is one backlog that's organized around user needs. Now, for a large product, right away there's all kinds of issues that come up, but there are techniques available for how to split those large user needs into parts that are small enough that teams can imagine getting them done and completely done inside of a sprint. So that's one of the things one of the pieces of the puzzle. Let's come back to how the teams are structured. If our team is, now what made sense in the 90s, like the early 90s when I did this work on the Boeing 777, we were involved in one tiny little component of this airplane that's got 1,000 different systems in it and are all talking over this network to each other. And that made sense for then because, as it was the best we knew how to do at the time, and also the requirements were relatively static compared to today. So we could count on these things not changing a lot. And we had some trust that our experts had given us reasonably good requirements, reasonably good interfaces. And so the result was we only went over budget by like 50% instead of 10 times, like what could have happened or often happens in some other development endeavors. But now, 21st century, what's another way that would work? Does anyone here, if I say component team versus feature team, okay, John knows this, I think. Bob better know this. By John, I mean both Johns ought to know this. Have I just lost you when I describe component team versus feature team? I'm going to assume that I have. So let's go into that a little bit. Picture a feature team. Well, let's make a simple example first before I show a picture. Let's say you have 14 people, and you're developing an online service, and you already know at the beginning that there's going to be a front end and a back end. Let's back up a bit more and your experience suggests that when you get beyond about 7 people on a team, its ability, the team self-organization doesn't work very well. It becomes difficult. The number of connections, increases as a square, all that. So we already know that you probably want 2 or 3 teams out of these 14 people. You have a front end and a back end. Intuition is to create a front end team and a back end team, right? That's the obvious solution. And it's going to hurt if you do that, unless you had everything right in the beginning, unless you knew your requirements and they weren't going to change, and you weren't going to have integration problems, and all your APIs were so simple that, and they would never change. If we're optimizing for adaptiveness, we're going to instead suggest both teams are full stack teams. Both teams have expertise both in the front end and the back end. Now, right away, a problem goes up. You think, wait a minute, we can't learn all that. We can't get a team to learn all that. And I think that's whether we examine or not, that's the unexamined assumption behind our original idea of let's have a front end team. They'll be experts at front end work. Turns out not to be as big a problem as you imagine, because as we may have time to explain later on, those teams are still going to be taking on work within an area that they have expertise in. So a team, even if it's a full stack team, and let me show a picture here. It's a picture from the Scrum reference card, which you're welcome to download if you like. Even we have a feature team, and it's not going to necessarily, it doesn't need to know every line of code, 10 million lines of code in the whole system, because when they're planning their sprints, we have a mechanism that the team will eventually get the responsibility to select work that they know how to do. So if the work they're doing, it involves the front end and the back end or whatever might be in the middle, they are specializing, but they're not specializing in technical layers anymore. They're specializing in customer needs, which is where we want specialization. Now we want to outlearn our competitors. So this is a good kind of specialization, rather than specializing in a particular technical area. And of course, on the team, if we have 7 people on the team, doesn't necessarily mean that every individual is completely interchangeable. So we watch out for false dichotomy like that. When we say cross-functional team or multidisciplinary team in Scrum, we mean that collectively, if we add up all the skills of the team members, we wind up with a team. The sum of those things is a cross-functional result. Now, it may happen that individuals also become, I hope that they will drift towards developing their own skills stack, their knowledge stack. But at least collectively, in the beginning, we would start with teams that are feature teams rather than only working in a particular architectural layer. Now, when I say, this is not hard and fast rule, I'm going to say most of the time, there are always exceptions, right? But most of the time, we would prefer that. At least we want to add that to your toolbox. So what I just described, anyone remember what it's called? The alternative to component teams, the opposite of a component team.
The feature team.
Is a feature team, yes. Let's, and you can learn more about feature teams here, featureteams.org. Try to remember to send out all these links that we put up here. And we'll give a definition of a feature team also here. Team has the necessary knowledge and skills to complete an end-to-end customer-centric feature, meaning satisfies an end user's needs. And if not, and usually they won't in the beginning, we're creating the environment where the team is expected to learn or acquire the needed knowledge and skills. Now that takes time, right? That's not free. Learning is not free. It's okay. Think of software development. I don't know. Do we have programmers in the room? Or previous and maybe in college you wrote some code, 1, 2, 3. You've done a few lines of it. Okay, more than half the room has likes a little bit of experience in that. Programming, the way I see it now, after I learned in the 1970s, and I got my first job in the early 80s. Programming is 99% learning, 1% typing. That's what the work really is. If you could just, you could just sit down and just, write a program to do this and just do it at your full typing speed. Imagine what that would be like. But we know that the real bottleneck is it's knowledge creation work. So we're going to be learning anyway, and it's the things we're going to be learning are going to be changing all the time, and we need to recognize any approach that's going to work is going to involve commitment. Every sprint, expect that some of the time is going to be spent learning something. If you can either pay me now or pay me later, one way or another, you're gonna buy this learning. So just understand, build it in, front load it, build it into every sprint. Some learning and some actual development work. Another aspect of feature team, trying to stay on time here, is stable and long-lived, because learning about each other is another aspect that's usually neglected when we think about our overall project plan. Learning how to work together in our team, learning the best way, going through maybe for forming, storming, norming, or whatever other cliche you have. But one way or another, intuitively that a team doesn't do its best work the first month, or perhaps even the first year. According to some research, it takes several years. So we're going to suggest an approach where we try to keep teams together with a focus on learning, and instead of moving individuals to the work, as we would do traditionally, we're going to look for a way to move the work to teams that stay together. So we consider the team the atomic unit of our software development organization, a team-based approach. For all kinds of reasons that we don't need to go into, but I think at some intuitive level you probably recognize might work better than what usually happens. So how are the teams structured? How are the teams directed? This will come back to that problem earlier. Let's put this picture on the screen about dependencies. We have a team that needs something from something else. So let's say what you really wanted was this reset password via email feature. And so team A, how's that going? That's the most important thing. What's happening with that? And they said, well, we'd love to work on that. The problem is that we're waiting for team C to finish authentication, that they do that work. So, okay, you go to team C and say, authentication, well, how's that going? Team C says, well, yeah, we'd love to work on that. Problem is that we're waiting on, see where this is going, right? Team B has the one person in the company who knows how to sign an SSL cert or something like that. So the expertise to do this is all held up here by team B, and so we're all sitting around waiting. Now, it's not always as obvious as this, and so what's going to happen instead is people are going to do other work. They're going to do work out of priority order, and that work, the work that they're doing in order to be efficient in the big picture, could be slowing you down, because that's even more work that has to be integrated into the end product. So now our integration queue that you mentioned earlier is even bigger than it was before, because not only do we have to integrate the high value features, we have to integrate the low value work that people were doing while they were waiting for someone else to get their stuff sewn, so we get to work on the high value features. And I sympathize with those of you that are having to try to solve basically a puzzle that can't be solved with the pieces that we've been given. We've got to think about another approach, and one way or another, it's going to involve team learning, right? It's going to involve a focus on learning. Well, let's say we try this. Let's say, okay, MJ, even though it's no risk to you and it's a risk to my career, I will try organizing feature teams instead of component teams. I'll do that just because you said it's a good idea. How do we plan the work then? We're still going to have some of the same problems until we recognize that there are a lot of intermediate structures between the customer's needs that are very likely adding noise, or at least slowing down our things that have to click into place before the next thing can happen. So adding risk and delay. All of this is undone work. If you're looking at it from a Scrum perspective, if anyone's ever learned about the Toyota production system, you become allergic to work in progress. Anytime you see inventory or undone work, it bothers you. You're thinking about how can we cut that in half from what it was before. Undone work causes risk and delay, and you might be recognizing that these are some of the problems that typically happen with large-scale development, is we have more undone work than we did if we had just tried this with one team. So how are the teams directed? When I get to the punchline later on, you're going to see that there's a lot of things that can go wrong if we have intermediate structures that are causing teams to work out of priority order. For example, in this picture, very likely Team A had someone telling them what to do. Team B had a different person driven by possibly different incentives in the organization, in the structure and the policies, trying to achieve something else, etc. And that's going to introduce friction with the ultimate. Now, ultimately, it's driven by customer needs, but it's not as. And this has worked, for a while. People have managed to do this, but your competitors are getting better at adapting to customer needs, and this will slow you down. So here's where we go into the world of. Let's say we had one backlog. Let's say how would teams plan their work with one backlog? And there's a video about this already. So let me try to summarize that and say it's a solved problem, has been solved, how you could have possibly eight teams working from a single product backlog. They're going to need some of the components, some of the pieces of the puzzle are, for some events, the teams will select representatives that they will meet with each other, team representatives, and we like to rotate those representatives to try to prevent the structures from forming, the ice flows from forming, right? That can slow down the requirements, user needs are flowing through our river. Teams will work with each other on backlog refinement. So now we have the people doing the work involved in taking the user requirements and making it into small enough user requirements, so still user stories, but tiny aspects of them, maybe with one penny of direct business value, but still each one having real customer value, so that we can close the validated learning loop with our customers, with our end users. God, I hope I'm not losing you with all this. Validated learning loop means let's check our assumptions. The work that we're doing, does it produce value for the user, or is there something that we could be doing better than that? The tighter and more accurate we can make that learning loop, the more adaptiveness we have to real customer needs, which is what we're going to need to know how to do in the 21st century. So validated learning loop involves the delivery of workable features that they can actually use and try out and then get direct feedback on, and actually they will learn, the users and customers are learning along with us what their real needs are. And our goal is to outlearn the competition, of course. All right, so we're going to have teams collaborate on backlog refinement. We're going to have teams collaborate on sprint planning. Perhaps they will send. Now, if we have two teams, no problem. 24 people in a room might be iffy. 14 people in a room probably can work all right. Yeah, that can work all right. But once we get to 64 people, it's not going to be a good use. They're not going to want to sit there and 64 people argue with the product owner about what to do that sprint. So more likely they're going to send one or two team representatives and then talk about, well, what's the most important thing to do this sprint, and those teams will, the team representatives will have some discussions about which team is most suited to do which work. So that stuff that you used to be doing months in the beginning are now happening in closer to real time. They're happening every 2 weeks now. We are reallocating work or attention to work. Consider that if we consider the human being to be the resource, we are shortchanging ourselves and them. If we consider the human attention of the teams doing the work as our resource, now we're on the right track. And that second resource might be decreased by merely adding people, right? Because you have a team that's working well, now you add 2 more people, and now it have to reinvent themselves, at least for some period of time. So you see how the resource of human attention and creativity and energy to solve problems, if that's what we're optimizing for, if we consider the human being herself to be the resource, where we might be introducing some blind spots. Y'all get what I'm saying? So we think about the human attention as the resource instead of the individuals. All right, so teams. So we're making decisions in real time about how to, not real time, but every 2 weeks, about reallocation of attention to the things that turn out to be the most important now. So we're not stuck to a plan that we came up with, or someone else came up with 2 years ago, back when we didn't know anything. And then another part of sprint planning, as you may have learned in your Scrum training or in the Scrum guide, is the how, figuring out how we're going to achieve the what that we've proposed during the early part of sprint planning. And that can be done by the teams, by breakouts, by the teams themselves in their own breakout rooms. And they should be near each other, that if they discover, and they should discover, that they're going to need each other to accomplish that work, instead of having the asynchronous dependency that we had back here, instead of having asynchronous dependencies, now we can plan them in one sprint together. We're converting asynchronous dependencies. That's what slows us down, is async. If you've worked on large software systems, you know that asynchronous activities are slow. But if we can plan them all together in the same sprint, instead of calling it dependency now, let's just call it, now it still is, but let's consider it shared work that we're planning together in the same sprint together. Okay, a bunch of stuff. If companies would just figure out this much, imagine how much better their lives would be. So critical path still happens, but it changes, and we're constantly adapting to it. And every time, if we're all looking at the same backlog, teams are getting feedback about what they need to be learning that they hadn't been learning before, when they were being spoon-fed technical requirements that had been come up with based on decisions that were made perhaps a year earlier. I hope you're with me so far, because it's going to get a little bit harder now. Just a little bit. All right. Now we've got that going. I'm going to, we'll get there in a minute. So let me just, I should make this explicit. The my work, your work world, like this is my work and that's your world, your work, does not lend itself to adaptiveness. Take a very simple case. Perhaps, let's not be sexist. I was going to use an example from my marriage, but I think you can imagine one person's normally better at doing a particular thing and the other person's normally better at doing another thing. But if we were to stick to those, when requirements change or the needs change, if we were to stick to that come hell or high water, we would be optimizing for comfort and efficiency, but not optimizing for adaptiveness. In the 21st century, we probably need to be able to optimize for adaptiveness. So consider that my work, your work, in general is harmful to large-scale adaptiveness or agility. Having one team always work on the same code is also harmful to the big picture. Now, we might have affinities. Now, this team can do it twice as fast as this other team, or 10 times faster, perhaps. We might have affinities, but we still want the ability to change that when the requirements become, when the needs or changes in priorities become more important than the efficiencies that we had from our previous plan. This is another reason for planning each sprint together, involving every team in the sprint planning that's organized around one backlog. All right, so we have all that going, let's say. The other thing is that technical practices, I won't go as deep as I planned to, but let's just suggest that a technical approach that creates the most visibility and transparency is going to be kind of a baseline requirement for doing the next things I'm going to describe. That means we're integrating continuously. And continuous integration means to integrate continuously. It means we are eliminating branching or long-lived branches in our source code repository. A branch is like an alternate universe. It's convenient for us to create our own world where our code looks different from everyone else's code, and in the future we're going to merge those together. That's a local optimization. That's convenient for us, but in the big picture, many organizations have been slowed down by that, which is why you get like places like Google or Amazon, they got 3,000 check-ins per hour. They can do that because they're all working on the trunk. They're all looking at the same code. And hopefully you recognize if we've got people integrating to this code that's all shared, we better have automated test on that. So automated test becomes part of definition of done, which means the teams are not going to demonstrate anything that's not truly done. It's not truly done if it doesn't have automated test. And the best way to do that is, I hope you've heard of test-driven development. The best way, it's my favorite way. Best is arguable, but it's a way that I've seen work, so I'm going to advocate for it. All right, now let's get into some of the nitty-gritty. How are those teams going to collaborate? Let's say we are going to have multiple teams working in a shared backlog. Where's the right screen? Remember to turn your phone off before you do a talk. All right. So I already gave you why we're not huge fans of Scrum of Scrums. Now, if it's working, if you believe it's working, and perhaps it's good enough, but I want to add some other tools to your toolbox. These are all based on, as I said before, structural and policy changes to the organization. And we're really looking at developing a whole product view rather than, the narrow world that our own team sees. That means a Scrum Master, instead of what you might have learned or had the impression in the beginning, what I originally thought, is protect the team from the wolves. Yeah, but what if those people we're calling wolves, what if they're actually driven by, in the big picture, if we're working around one product backlog towards one sprint review, those people that want help from our team, they're not wolves, they're collaborators. They're people that we want to, so here the Scrum Master is erasing these boundaries, not drawing these lines, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people after their first impression of what Scrum is about. Our favorite way, if a person on team A needs to work with a person on team W, our favorite thing is for them to just talk. We want to create the environment where they would naturally talk to each other and they're helping each other out because they're not being driven by conflicting priorities. Part of the reason to have one sprint, one product backlog. All right, but how do you know who to talk to? You could always, let's say it's 8 teams, there's 63 people. Well, hopefully you know your own team, but there's 50 people you don't know. How do you know who to talk to? That brings us to the technical practices. And in shorthand, we say communicate in code. Now, we don't mean encode your communication. What we do mean by this is we reduce the friction that currently exists in your organization, preventing teams from knowing what other teams are working on, knowing the details about how they're going to work and how it's going to affect their own thing. Like the problem we were talking about before with teams A, B, and C, and how are the pieces going to fit together, discovering later that they don't and people aren't available then to fix it. This is why continuous integration is kind of a prerequisite for the other stuff that I'm talking about here. Communicating code, so we want to make it as easy as possible to detect merge conflicts when they happen. As soon as I'm thinking about writing a line of code that conflicts with something that someone else did 10 minutes ago, I want to be able to find that out. And if we're practicing test-driven development, if we're doing continuous integration, I will be able to find that out. Compared to what typically happens, might be a week later or worse. Another piece of the puzzle, scouts. So we would send, but anyone else a Boy Scout when they were, or a Girl Scout? I've got daughters who are not into the outdoors. So I haven't got to relive that yet. But sending scouts out to other teams. Maybe we would visit another team's daily scrums. I think I heard in the sprint planning that team X is the one working on that. So let's drop in, have someone observe their daily scrum, and they will learn from that who the right person to talk to is about the problem that we have on our team, how we're going to get our work done. So consider sending scouts out to other teams. We would still, as a kind of, there's a picture of this here. We got multiple teams working together on the same thing. We still need them to collaborate. All right, we still need them to collaborate with each other. Show you our feature team picture again. And this is part of the basic Slack that we're trying to teach you to put into every sprint. Some of that work is, it's not just sit down and type code. Some of your work is going to be working with other people. Maybe I'm working on the database on team 3. I should be talking to my counterparts on the other 2 teams. Otherwise, we'll wind up with denormalized tables, or we're going to step on each other's work. One way or another, we're going to hurt each other. Does that make some sense? So that's the cost. If you think, and it's not proven that using 64 people is faster than using 8 people. But if we're going to decide to do that, this is part of the cost, is some of that time is going to be spent them teaching each other. People who used to be doing direct work are becoming mentors instead. And all these things I'm talking about, there's more you can read about them. I want to respect your time.
And so, Michael, I just want to give you a 3-minute warning.
Yep. 2.5, actually. So there'll be links to these other things. We don't really like Scrum of Scrums that much, but keep it if you love it. Multi-team meetings. So as I mentioned earlier, we would be planning our sprint together, very likely. Not everyone has to be there for all parts of this, but the volunteers for whom it's relevant to be there. Use the law of 2 feet, meaning if I'm not learning or contributing, then I use my 2 feet to go somewhere else. Right? As soon as we institute a regular event, it becomes a risk of just becoming a huge time suck that doesn't increase your ability to get stuff done. So a variety of things that we will do, including multi-team design workshops. Understand that even if we're on different teams, we're working towards one sprint goal together. And so it's in our interest for some of our teams to be involved in these other events. Perhaps there's one person.
Bullet to exchange team members in the daily scrum.
Oh yeah, it's just another team A and team W are doing closely related work. There's a dotted line between us, but we want to have personal connections and empathy, and know who on those teams are doing these things, so we can, instead of waiting for the next 2-week cycle to resolve a dependency, we can resolve it that day. That makes sense?
Yeah, but basically, like when you started, you said you should always keep the feature team together, but they're saying you're really not, right?
I'm full of contradictions, aren't I? Yeah, we're on our team.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me hear this to visualize it a little better. I'm on team 1, right? But I've got to be talking to people on team 2 or 3. Now, if it turns out eventually that I've got so much business there that I shouldn't even be on team 1, then we can talk about that. And a team self-design workshop, will allow the flexibility for people to shift if they feel the need to later, if it turns out that that's better. Yeah. But as a principle, now we have 2 principles in conflict. One is that human psychology. It's easier to work with people we know, develop, a team with them. And the reality of having 84 people or 64 people where the knowledge is fractalized or spread out. I should still be reaching out and finding those. And some people will be more extroverted than others as well. Yeah. One more, I'll give 2 more patterns, and then we'll open up general Q&A. Here we go. We'll send out these links later on. So travelers, meaning a person might become a full-time member of another team temporarily, and then a full-time member of yet another team temporarily, in order to spread the knowledge and skills that the one person has, those critical path people, so that they aren't critical path anymore. This requires learning some amount of maturity to realize that specialization harms your career. And leading team. Maybe we shouldn't use so many people in the first place, or at least initially we should have one team figure out how to do this, figure out the best solution, and then other teams might follow them the way ants follow the successful ants that found the food, the pheromone trails they leave down. So that was what planned things I had to say, leaving some stuff out. I hope it was hard to judge what works for people, but I hope some of this is useful to you, give you some idea of what the problems that we're typically dealing with in large-scale Scrum or less, which is the flavor of Scrum that I'm most into nowadays. We'll send some resources you can use if you want to learn more about this particular aspect of less or other things.
What you just showed last was from less.works, right?
Next, the last one I showed is there, but the article as my own spin on it is on my site.
Wow, because it seems to be very clear.
Yeah, but I'm stealing. Oh, this part. This is an excerpt from Less Works. Yeah, the Less Works website. Yeah, so I'm just adding some explanation to it because people are having trouble understanding just from the source material sometimes.
Oh yeah, so we're going to get access to that. That's great.
Yeah. I'll just link to all. I'll send out links to, or someone will send out links to all this, the things I mentioned.
It's called Less Works. LAS Works.
Less.works. Yes, is the.
Okay.
Or I'll put this article up first, or I'll send it out to the chat. One of the comic book. Let's see, where's that? Is that already in the thing that went out before?
No, it'd be good to send it again.
Comic book that it got like 3,000 shares on LinkedIn. So apparently I hit a nerve with that. Let me send out that. There's a video version as well. There's a Chinese version.
And I don't know if you're gonna have time, but I'd love to hear your perspective as far as Scrum is Scrums, because it seems like a lot of companies really think that's the answer.
For them, it might be, yeah. I don't want people to think the reason it bothers me is that it's presented as the solution, and it's presented as, and it's not part of Scrum. It's presented, and that's what bothers me, is it's the only tool in our toolbox, and it shouldn't be, because there are so many other ways that people have found. If we create the right environment, they should be inventing their own ways to work as multiple teams towards the shared sprint goal. But no, I've had people tell me, "Oh, we love it. It's for us, it was the missing piece." So I'm not gonna. Scrum, please don't come and arrest you. To do it. But I do want you to know it's not the only tool. There are others, and you might like the others better.
So I guess, Michael, you open it up for questions. So we can keep the recording going for the questions.
So, thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
I get lonely, so I love being able to interact with people about this stuff.
Question, NJ, for multiple teams, if you're used to, like, I work in an environment where we have a platform that's got multiple Scrum teams they're working together, but they work independent. So there's a quote core team, which is made up of a group of maybe 2 or 3 teams, and there's a specific component, different component groups that are driven by the different product owners that are driving it. And at the end of the day, they're trying to get them to integrate in, so you have you're all rowing the same way, or you're all going in the same direction. Is a challenge. How long does it take to train teams to be able to go beyond just, I'm in my environment, I got my backlog, and I'm doing my thing, so that it all fits?
Well, the focus, what Ken first told me, and this was, and he kind of whispered this to me, that the focus of Scrum is more about removing the harm, the things that are causing the harm, than on adding it. There's no secret ingredient in Scrum. I mean, feedback loops, collaborate. These are all
Yeah.
things that
Sure.
you'll know. But the problem is that there are structural and policy aspects of our org design that are disincenting people from helping each other.
Got it.
I love to help you with that, but we have this is our sprint goal for our product owner.
Yep.
So I suggest this is ultimately a structural. Now you can get people to be nice and but ultimately I suggest it's caused by structure and policy.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank
so I
you.
didn't have an easy.
No, that's okay.
no.
I know it's a learning for us, but it's one of those challenges. There's not a silver bullet, so that's why.
And you asked about how long. I'll say in general the question about how, like the place that I worked with the most introducing less,
Right.
it took them. The first year was hell. The first year was worse.
Yep.
Somewhere around the middle of the second year, people started to see the light, and then by the third year, that was when they were. That third year was when they released the product that had fewer bugs than anyone could remember in their history with the company. But in their case, it took them 3 years to get there,
So
and that was
makes sense.
with executive vice president support, which not everyone here has.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess.
Thank you.
Hamad, you had a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to ask that now.
Sure. Hi, MJ. My question is primarily on, while working on large scale solution, and you are, it's kind of piggybacking on what Tom just asked. In my organization where we have teams across, various solution lines, or
Yeah.
they all kind of are responsible for their P&L for their respective products, and their focus is, their vision, their mission for that particular product. However, there is a core product that you need to, always enhance. And as you're doing, the strategic, transformation, you do have to work, with your integrating teams. So when you start, something new, a new strategic initiative, my attempt was to hear from your experience. How do you, align these teams on a common set of objectives so that you can deliver on, your MVP? What has been your approach? And I was just trying to, relate to that. And in your presentation, I saw one where you showed those multiple sprints dependencies. Any suggestion on how much of backlog should be groomed so that you can, exactly this one, because it shows multiple sprints, multiple teams, but to have that sense of, each team picks what they want to deliver in their sprint. But my thought was, what's your recommendation? How much in future grooming you should consider doing, to have this sense, of the what are the dependencies across your teams and the upcoming sprints.
Yeah,
two questions. Sorry, I
that's
wrote
good.
one in the chat, and I thought let me just add one more.
It's a good question, and I think other people are having the same thing. So I want to show. I'm looking for a video that helps visualize it. I don't multitask very well, so stand by while I find the video. Here it is. All right. The planning. So if we are going to, well, I will suggest that in this picture, the ultimate problem here was 3 lists of work. And they were probably organized around convenience or political domains, one way or another, or some decision that was made in the past, a structural decision. And I'll start off by saying I haven't solved this. The only time I've been happy about the solution was when we changed that structure, which means erasing some stuff, reducing organizational complexity to the point that we're working off a shared backlog. And once we'll have a shared backlog and a product owner, which means that the product is probably bigger than what we were thinking of it as before. The solution, if we think about it from a customer, ask your customer what their product is. How to place, it was a place sort of like PayPal where they had 130 product owners because they had 130 different components inside their product. But the customer, PayPal user doesn't see 130 products, right? They they think there's one product. Now it gets into some weird edge cases, and probably yours is like this, where, well, do you consider Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel to be two different products, or are they both part of Office suite? Or, and so there's, and this is not there's no obvious answer to that. But the bigger picture view we take, the better chance we have for optimizing in the big picture. So we're going to suggest, instead of what you described, a product backlog with a product owner who's tied to someone who can actually make a business decision, an executive, someone at the product management level, probably, if it's that big. And then now it's up to teams. So we're moving stuff out of the space of organizers and coordinators into the space of team, into the realm of team self-organization, into the realm of team self-management. In order to have remember that undone work causes risk and delay. So we'd really want to have every 2 weeks, at least, we'd want to have a product that could go out the door, integrated product. Then sort of waving my hand over how to make that happen. Because as I said before, it took 3 years for one place that I worked with to get there. But let's say we could do that. And then how are we going to plan the sprint? And let's say in this case, we've got 3 teams. During the first part of sprint planning, teams, or more likely team representatives, are selecting the work from the product backlog that they're going to do, that their team is going to do that sprint. So they have to, people with their hands dirty in the work involved in this, deciding who's going to be, should we do this one, or maybe it's better if your team does that. So people as close as possible. They will still make mistakes, but now we have the ability to correct the mistakes more rapidly than we did before. And then that's done jointly with the product owner. And then in the separate breakout sessions, the teams can make their own specific sprint plans, come up with the tasks required to satisfy the work that they're planning to do this sprint. Now, we might have 2 teams might do that in the same room. They have 2 task boards, but they're going to be sharing their conversations because they're going to need each other's work so much. You all seen that happen, right? There's one person that knows something, so we're going to need access to that person, and so they're going to have to, this team will plan to help that team, and this team will plan to get help from that team, and they're both going to take on less work, less overall feature scope in order to achieve that. So that's another part of it, is we got to, and it's really changed to our policy here. If our policy was to maximize output, that we won't be able to do this. Because we have to, in order to to maximize learning and to know that we're on track and have that constant reality check, we're out learning our competitors, it means we're giving up some short-term efficiencies. We're giving up the immediate, what looks like progress in the short run, but if we were to step back and look at the big picture, is actually harming us. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
You did to some extent, yeah. But I was just, to me, this, I'm kind of relating this to the scaled agile structure, where you have, all the core team members coming together and plan like a program increment. But my other question was, what's your recommendation? How much, in future you should plan? How many sprints you should plan? Is it something you would
0
put a count, or 0?
So yeah, well, 1 of course, but we would, but in our, so meaning that the backlog is always meant to be constantly changing, adapting. So we would not want to lock anything down, but we do want to look ahead a few sprints. So
Few sprints. Okay.
yeah, usually we'd suggest, now it depends. A lot of people say if there's more than 100 items in the backlog, the product owner cannot prioritize the work. So something about that as an appropriate level of granularity. And it really depends how nimble you need to be, but we're going to suggest that backlog refinement work, or grooming, is multi-team work, and we're committing some part of every sprint to
planting trees in Rutherford.
You'll catch that. Yeah, so it's a part of every sprint. We used to say 10% of every sprint we would spend looking at the next few sprints, looking at the backlog for the next, understanding that stuff is going to come up, it's going to change, but at least the 80% of the work is probably going to be what we planned it, and there's going to be some surprises every sprint planning.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, another piece of this, I'll call this Terry's Agility Index, which is how much of the work, let me fast forward to sprint review. So you get to sprint review and you demonstrate, in this case, a unicycle to the customers and users, and they try it out and they say, yeah, that's great, but what we really need is a two-wheeled vehicle. Now, what ratio of the work you're doing in the next sprint is a result of the review meeting you just had? We'll call that my friend Terry. Terry's Agility Index. Meaning it shouldn't be zero, right? If we're just sticking to the plan that we had before, no matter what, then it's probably something, we have a feedback loop broken somewhere. We're probably not learning as fast as we can because our customers didn't know everything 2 weeks ago that they know now, or 4 weeks ago, especially after they tried using the product. So Terry's Agility Index probably shouldn't be zero. Some amount of what you're doing the next sprint should be, I think. And this is general statements. When I say should, I'm always wrong. But consider the possibility that you're missing something. There's an opportunity to learn from the customer that you're missing out on. But the short answer was 3 sprints, 2 or 3 sprints.
Thank you.
Yeah, typically.
Bob, to you.
Okay, so I guess with that, again, I'd like to thank you, Michael, for having your time, giving your time to be with us tonight. I found it really ultimately interesting, and I'm sure this recording will be probably referenced quite a bit because it has a lot of great information in it. So thank you, Michael.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking to you all.
All right.
And I guess so one way or another, you'll get some links about if any of this you want to follow up on, you can learn about that.